So what I'm going to do is we're going to draw, or I am going to draw Felix Continental Cafe, or the Flats. It's that area over there. I loved Felix when it was open, and I'm very sad that it's no longer there. And from where I am at, I want I actually want to draw it as though I was standing in the street, but I can't stand in the street. So I'm going to draw it from right here. I'm going to draw it as though I was looking right at the front of it. And this is going to be like a grid. And it's basically going to be as though I was standing right in front of it. And so all of the lines that I'm going to do are basically going to be horizontal and vertical. There's not going to be any perspective on it. It's just going to be a flat, like if I was standing right in front of it. Now, having said that, that means that I'm going to measure things with my eye, but not, it doesn't have to be precise. Okay, what we're doing is we're just trying to get a building-ish kind of a thing. Okay, so what I want to do, I have to first of all decide what it is that I want to have in my drawing. Like, what is the most interesting thing about this painting? And I kind of like the clock and the flats and the Felix. I like the structure of it, and I like the juxtaposition of the two structures together. So I can, in terms of my composition, I can I can take this little area that I'm using and figure out how I want to fit that in. So because the thing that I think is the most interesting is the Felix Cafe, I'm going to see that as a rectangle shape, that just the whole wooden border from the top all the way down to the side to where the door is at the bottom. And I'll draw that as like a rectangle, okay? So you're kind of thinking about just what the overall shape would be. And by the way, look at how I'm not using a ruler and my lines are not straight. In fact, I don't want you to use straight lines. I want it to be fun and lively, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because the more energy it has, it feels like it's alive. Okay. And if this is wrong, it's fine. I have an eraser. I can always erase this if I want it to be a little bit different. Now I'm going to go across the bottom and make the bottom of this. This is the ground plane. Okay. And then I'm going to see, let's see, the vision of the two buildings is roughly here. And I'm going to go, well, I'm thinking now that I like the top of the building, so I maybe want to include that. I like how it's got one higher and one lower, so I'm going to add that as well. And then there's the 34 over there. Now I think that this is a little too high, and so I'll make this adjustment. I'll make this a little bit lower. I'll put the dividing line here, and then I'll put the top of that Felix thing there. And then the flats is a little bit higher. I'm just guessing. And then we've got the two rain gutter things, and I can kind of draw one in there, and then the other one over here, and then the flats is a little higher. And now what I'm doing is just I'm looking for the big shapes. So here's roughly the flats there, and then we have the awning, and then we've got the door, and it looks like the door is smaller than the other door. The other door looks, when I see people next to it, I see it's very, very tall. So that's going to be accounting for the difference in size. And then there's the awning here, and it's around the same height, and it says watches. And then there's some lights hanging on top. Okay. For here, the Felix Continental Cafe, I'm looking at how it's 3 rectangles. And so I'm just going to divide that into 3 sections. And then I'm going to put that section there. There's a little bit of a wooden part here that I really like and I want to get. And then the door is roughly in the middle. Okay. And then we've got the windows. And the windows here. And so I want to make, I think this is a little bit of a ledge here. Okay. And then there's the window over here, it's blocked, and it says 34 in the middle, and then there's a door. And you'll notice that my proportions are not even accurate. This door is a lot taller in real life, but I don't care. I'm just gonna go with it. And notice that so far all of my lines are horizontal and vertical. Okay, so now I'm gonna get the windows, and the windows are basically just rectangles. And if I look at where the two green awning windows are, they're basically right above the Felix Cafe. And this is not quite accurate, but I know that they're roughly about that. I can draw the architectural element. Now, the thing is, with any architectural element, you can draw whatever you want to add. If you want to paint it, then draw it. If you don't want to paint it, just pretend it doesn't exist. No one's going to know. No one's going to say, hey, that's missing the brick. You can be like, there was no brick. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, and so those windows have like several panels on them or panes, and I'm just going to divide it just like this, because that is a nice simple way to do it. And then this other one over here has the thing that I like about those windows. It has the wrought iron on it. Those are a little bit taller, and there's one. The other two are a little bit further away, and I'm just going to pretend that they're not even in this picture because I don't want them there. And I'm going to put the little awning, I'm going to make it a little bit more of a rectangle so it looks like it's coming out. And then I can draw this, a very simplified wrought iron thing here, and maybe the little things at the bottom. Now the architectural elements, I can kind of see what is happening there and simplify that as well. And I'm going to add a little bit more over here. And there's some like little squares here, and then there's little squares here. Now, in my mind, it doesn't have to be precise, but what I do here, I want that to be consistent. So I'm not going to put as many rectangles as there are up at the top, but whatever I do, I want to make sure that they look good here. So these are going to be evenly spaced, and they're going to be a little bit bigger. Okay, and then there's a tree. I don't know if I'm going to add the tree or not. I might not. But of course, I can't see a lot of that stuff because the cars are in the way, and so I'm making it up. There's a number here. This is 38. There's something that says the flats on top of there. And then we have trash cans. I don't need that. We have signs. And then we have the clock. And so I could add the clock. And because I'm making this up based on what I'm seeing, I'm not drawing it precisely. I'm drawing it based on the orange circle. So it's orange circle-ish. I'm going to draw the clock like right in the middle here. And I think that would be fine. I'm going to have it like right overlapping, and then that could be kind of like my little differencing thing here. And I can draw that so that it is in front, and I can add the I don't know, the extra details in there. And then I'm not even going to worry about the numbers yet. And I can write anything in here that I want, but for now I'm just going to, I'll write Felix. I didn't write it right. Felix and then cafe. And then I'll put the flats, and it doesn't have to be precise. Okay, and it's got watches and stuff. I forgot that there's a window over here and a window over here. Okay. Ta-da, I'm done. Once you do a drawing, the drawing is basically the layout of where your color is going to be. And if you think of it in terms of coloring book, like you're figuring out what shapes you're going to be using for your color, that's when you can draw the kind of the way that's very helpful for watercolor. So every shape that you draw will be designated a space for color, and it doesn't have to be individual shapes. The thing that's so cool about watercolor is that you can combine shapes and decide. So what we want to do is we want to have, I'm just going to use a big brush, what is it? This is a 10. It's a round, and it's good for getting a lot of area. Also, it's good for small details because it has a nice round point. I usually will have a little thing like this, and I'll bring some extra for you guys next time. And then a water thing to just wet my palette with. And sometimes I will use this to kind of play and put water on the palette as well. But I'm going to play around with the outside area to show you different methods of approaching this, right? I did want to have the top part so I can have the blue sky, so this feels like it's outside. And I like to usually do the sky first, let that dry, and then do anything else after that. And I've got some really nice blue right here. And the blue that I'm using is I don't know which one it is. It's one of these, French Windsor blue, which is a very bright blue. And I love this for skies. It's a little brighter than what you normally see. But the thing about watercolors is nice is you can make things really rich and vibrant. I mean, I like color. So and I like to have a separate area or a separate sheet of paper. I'm going to see if I can get some less sparkle lights on there's some sun. Here we go. Okay. All right. So there's a couple of ways of painting in watercolor. The first is wet onto dry, which is when you're just taking your paint, and you're putting it on the dry surface. And the thing about watercolor that's so frustrating is that the work that watercolor does happens when it's wet. And a lot of times as beginners, when you're first painting with watercolor, the mistakes are you're not using enough water, or you're using too much, or you're putting paint on the area when it's still wet and it needs to be dry, or if it's not wet enough. It's all just about managing the water. So the first thing you want to know is that painting with watercolor, when it's on the page, once the paint is on the paper, it's active. It is alive. And the more alive it is, the more wet it is. And as it starts to get dry, it slowly becomes less active. And the less active it is, let's see. I don't know how to say that. Well, the less active it is, the more, the drier your paint has to be on top of it. Because the color that we use is being pushed by the water. So we add the water to the paint, and then we put the paint on our brush, and then our brush releases the paint onto our paper, and then the paint basically goes where the water flows. So if you have a lot of water, it's going to flow everywhere. If you don't have a lot of water, it's not going to flow everywhere. The more water you have with a little bit of color, the lighter it will be. If you want a lot of color for a large area, you have to use a lot of pigment with a lot of water. So right now, the first pass is the wash phase, and so you want to have a lot of water for doing that. But like I said, the first pass is going to be the sky. And what I usually do for the sky is, even though it's all blue, I don't care. I want to have at least 2 blues in there. So what I will do is I will start off with 1 blue, and then I will add a second blue in there. And I'll just start up at the top. And what I'm going to do is go past my border here. And that, I can see right now, that's not enough water. I need a lot more water because I want to push this. And see how it's creating this bead at the bottom? That means it's active, and that I can kind of move this across the page. So I'm going to, move that across the page. And a wash is that first bit of color that we put down. And when we get to the edges, we want to use the tip of our brush to go along the edge of our shapes. Okay, now it's very wet, and so that means it will be responsive to other colors. So I'm going to take this other blue. It's very, very dark. And see, that's still wet, so you can see the paint color is moving a little bit. So when I put the blue on here, this other blue, while that is still wet, you can see that it's moving a little bit. And what that's going to do is it's going to blend a little bit. Okay, so now I have a natural soft blending of one color to another. It's going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to move where the water is going. I always want to have my surface elevated so that gravity is working with me. If you paint flat, then the water just kind of sits in a puddle and it doesn't go where you want it to go. But I have all of this extra paint down here, and I need to capture that. I need to kind of pick it up. So I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to just use this damp brush. It's kind of like a straw. It's just soaking it up, and I always have a little paper towel rag next to me. And that way, I don't have more paint on the paper that I want. The other reason why we want to do that is because anytime you paint with watercolor, wherever the edge of that shape stops, it's hard. It's a nice crisp edge. And that's fine. We want to know that and use that to our advantage. When we want soft transitions of color, they have to be when the paint is wet. So you can see I put a little bit of dark blue in there, and it's softly graded, or it's softly merged to the light blue. And that's because the paint was active. I put another color on top of it and it merged, and that's what's happening here. And I think that's beautiful. I'm happy with it. That's great. So now I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to do this strip of color down here. I could do this next, but if I do, I have to be mindful of the wetness that this is up here, because if anything is wet, it will take paint and it will do what we call bleed. And it will, because the paint goes where the water flows. And if I wanted to have a hard edge here, I have to wait till this is all completely dry. And if I don't, then the color is going to merge into the sky. And that could be fine if that's what I want, or if I just decide that I don't care, that's fine too. But I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come down here to the bottom part. Now, the thing that's weird about painting concrete is, like, our brain goes, that's gray, okay? But gray, and you're painting with watercolor. How do you paint gray? Well, it doesn't have to be gray, but it should be light. It shouldn't be as dark as the brick. So really, this could be any kind of gray-ish color, but it should have some kind of color in it. And I will say that normally we think of the sun as yellow. When you're in kindergarten, you think of the yellow sun, and you see kids drawing it with like a yellow spot. So you can think of it as like using a warm yellow color, but very, very light. Okay, because right now the sun is hitting the ground there. Also, in the shadow, it's not really yellow, it's darker, so it's darker gray. So we'll deal with that later. I'm going to take this. I like to use dirty color on my palette, because then I have some interesting colors that I could use. And I like to just test it and see. And I think that looks good. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint that in the same way I did the sky. And I want to make sure that it is all wet and merging. Now you can see that I'm kind of going into other areas of my palette that have different colors. And that's what we call kind of wet into wet blending. And the other reason why I do that is because I like color. And I like to have things changing color in my paintings. And so now you see that I've gone from like a yellow to a blue, but this is all that same tea, that tea wash that I was talking about in the beginning. Now, the other thing to notice is, like, what is wet and what is dry. It's starting to dry as we speak, because it's a warm day. If I wanted to add any color to it, I could add a little bit of color to it, but it has to have less water, okay, than what's already on the paper. So I'm going to just add a little bit of color down at the base of this, and you'll see if it spreads, it's because the paper is wet. And if it doesn't, it's because the paper is dry. And right here, I can see that there is kind of what we call a bloom, and that's because this area has dried and this part is wet. And that's just where I'm going to let that be. Yeah, kind of fun, right? And that's the other thing. Bob Ross, you just got to be like, These are happy little mistakes. We're going to call them happy little mistakes. All right. So now what I want to decide is the big shapes that I'm going to use for my wash. I like I like the yellow and the green on the building, and I like the red on the other building too. They don't have to be that green. It can be greenish, or it could be a different color entirely. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to just make everything really saturated as I get going. But in the beginning, I'm going to start off with kind of like a yellow-ish kind of color, more warm on one side, and then I'll do that same thing but a little bit lighter on the other side just to make it varied. Right. So I've got some colors here. I've got a cad yellow. I'm doing on time. Cad for yellow, and I think this is already here, so I'm not going to add any more of that. And I have my warms next to each other. Yellow, this is my cad red and alizarin crimson, and I have a yellow ochre right here. So I'm going to kind of switch in between these colors, and I'm going to do what we call wet into wet, which is where I take one color and I'm going to add some water to that so it's already kind of active. This is a very strong kind of opaque color. So I'm going to test it and see what it looks like. That's all right. I think that's fine. If I want it to be a little bit lighter, I can add more water to it. And I can actually put it in a puddle over here and then add more water to it. And then that'll be even lighter. See, that's lighter. Okay, so I like that. And I'm going to kind of think, what can be all yellow over here? I think I could probably paint everything in yellow on this building. The windows are going to be darker. And so that's fine. I can cover that over later. But I think I want to leave this part not yellow because that's gray and I want that to be feeling like a different color. So here I go. I'm going to merge. I'm going to start off with the top. And when I do a wash, I like to start at the top and kind of go across. And I want to make sure that there's enough paint, what we're calling a bead right there, and so that I know that it's still active. Now I'm going to come in with a different color and add a little bit of red just so I have some, like a change a little bit. And I'm going to add some water there. Okay, and I can move that around, and I think I can just paint over that. That's fine. Because that's going to be green. How do you make green? You put blue with yellow. So, yep, there we go. Okay, so now I can make some of this maybe a little bit lighter by just adding plain water. Okay, and then that'll be a little bit lighter. And then I want to make sure that I have a nice wet area there. And I'm going to come in with a little bit of a darker color down here because I can see that this area down here is going to be darker. And I know that, oh, that's really red. That's okay. I'm going to leave this area gray or open. And you can see how there's some like interesting color variations happening in there. And I'm just kind of going with different colors and playing around and see. Remember, I said this doesn't have to be perfect. You're really just, I would love to see you play around with doing wet into wet where you're adding color, different types of color. Okay. Now that is one shape. And I'm going to let that dry. And while I'm letting that dry, I'm going to go paint the other side. And I might, because that's a different building and I want to put a little bit of a contrast in it, I might go cooler with it, meaning I might take, instead of like yellows and oranges and reds, I might go like more, I don't know, purple or blue. I don't know. That doesn't really make sense to me, but I'm going to try to add maybe some red to the blue, and that is, well, that's kind of floating around. I'm going to get this alizarin crimson, and this alizarin crimson with the blue is going to make this purple color. And that's basically, purple is a contrast of yellow. But I want it to be really light. So I'm going to come in here and remember, like I said, it doesn't have to be the same color. So I want this to be a little bit lighter. And because the awnings are red, dark red, and purple has red in it, I'm okay with that. And I might make a little bit more lighter in some areas, add a little bit more water. And you see I'm going around the clock. I'm going to add a little bit more red to this area here because I know that this is going to be red anyway. And while it's wet, that's okay to do that. Let me add a little bit more of this color over here. And maybe add a little bit more red down here. Okay, so I've got very wet area, very loose. This is very light up at the top, more red down there at the bottom. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start designating some shapes. Wait till this is dry. I think this is mostly dry. I'm going to start to do like the milk part, which is the paint that's a little bit more thicker and darker. So this one I'm going to make green. And I don't ever want you to use green from your tube. I want you to mix green. Green you mix with blue and yellow, and you've got different, you probably have different blues and different yellows. You'll have a ultramarine blue, which is a thank you, or a phthalo blue. And I'll mix these two blues and yellows together to see which one I like better. And I like that. I think that's nice. That's a good one. And that already has this yellow that I've used for that awning. But I think I need it to be a little bit thicker. And it's very, very wet right now. So I'm going to just touch my paper towel just to get some of that paint off of it. And now I'm just going to paint. And you can see it's darker. It's a little thicker. Not really thick, but it's more opaque. Okay, there's my green. All right. Now it's very wet on the edge, so I'm just going to use my brush that's a little bit damp. I'm just going to dry it up so I can pick up any of these extra areas so that they don't leak. All right. Now this area here, I said I wanted it to be a little bit of a bluish color, kind of more gray. So I'm going to take some of the blue that I already have on my palette, and I'm going to test it, and that looks fine. So I'm going to make sure that it's very, very light. Paint that on top of there, and I want to make sure that I pick up any of this extra damp stuff. Okay. Now, the other things that I could draw, I don't want to paint around this area right now because I'm waiting for this to dry. So I'll go ahead and paint the architectural elements at the top. And it looks kind of gray, but it's whatever it is, the same kind of color as these top parts here too. So whatever color I decide that's going to be, I can make that other top part. And I know I didn't do all of that other stuff. So, how long does it usually take for the paint to dry? Well, on a day like this, it will be quicker than if you're inside. And it depends on how much water you have. So one thing you can do is kind of touch it with the back of your finger, not the front because you don't want the oils, and then to see if it feels dry. And if you put the paint on and it's not moving, it's not like spreading, then you know that the paper is dry. So I'm going to just kind of go underneath here. And I'm using green. I know that's gray, and I don't care. I like the green. I think this is a nicer, darker green, and I wanted this to kind of contrast with the awnings, and I know that the awning is darker than the architectural elements, but like I said, it doesn't matter. You're painting for fun. And I'm using the tip of the brush to get that in there, and I think that's fun. So now I'm going to use that same green, and I'm using the tip of the brush to get that in there as well, filling in my paint shapes, and then the bottom part here and the bottom part there, and that looks good to me. And then maybe I'll just add a little bit of this color, but a little bit lighter for this bottom part. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to the wooden part, and I like that to kind of feel more representative of what I see. So I'm going to use this orange and yellow, which is super, super bright, and it's probably way too saturated. So the way that we make a color not so saturated to make it desaturated is we add its complementary color to it, and the complementary color of orange is blue. So I'm going to put a separate area of this orange over here, and I'm going to take a little bit of this blue. Are you okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Just put a little sunscreen on.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, so I pre-mixed the color on my palette, and I think that that looks nice. Add a little bit more here. Okay, and I'm going to test. It's still a little too light. I want to make it a little bit darker. Okay, so now I'm going to use the tip of my brush to just go and do the wooden part here. Whenever you're painting anything that has to require a straight line, I always say just don't breathe when you're doing it. Just hold your breath. And notice I'm using my whole hand. It's not moving. I'm using my arm to move my hand across. It's almost like I froze my hand and I'm using my arm there instead. Okay, and then I'm going to paint this bottom part here. What is there? And it's door-ish. And then I think that there's kind of wood along the edge here. And then there's wood along the edge here. And there and there. Okay. And the part on the bottom is a little bit darker. So I'm going to make that darker, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it. And it's going to be like a purple. There we go. Now you can see that where I'm adding it is mixing in with the other area that's wet, and that's okay. It's kind of merging with it, and I think that's kind of fun. What I'll do next is I'm going to move over to the other building there, and I'm going to switch it up to like, it's like a brick red color, but I'm going to stick with my cooler color area. So I have like this cad red. I think that's my cad red. And I want it to be a darker red, so the complementary color of red is green. So I'm going to take a little bit of this green that I've already mixed up over here, and I'm going to add it to that. And you can see now it's like a brick color. So I'm going to add that to this awning here. And at this point, I'm just basically, it's like I'm coloring by number kind of a thing. I want to paint this thing here. I noticed that the lights are a little bit lighter. So I'm going to negatively paint around those little lanterns, which requires that I go very carefully. And when I do this, you have to make sure you have enough paint so that it stays wet. If you're painting an area and you get over here and it's dry by the time you get back, you're going to have edges. We want nice, soft transitions. All right, there's that. And then I can kind of use that same, use a little bit more water in there, and I'm going to add that to here. And then this, I'll make this a little bit bigger. And then this there. There we go. And that works for me. Now I'm going to do the architectural elements, and I'm going to make those more orange. So I'm going to use some of the color that I already used, but I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to it, and I'll test it to see if I like it. I think that's okay. And then I'll come in here, and I think I want to add that to the top there. And I'm going to add it to these little squares here. And then to this part here. and here, and here, and here, and here. So I'm using this color kind of all over the place, but I also, one thing that I don't like doing is making things look like a coloring book. You can kind of approach it like a coloring book, but I don't want things to be all the same color. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll just add a dab of another color while it's still wet. Okay, so just that little bit of red in there just varied that color just a bit. It kind of made it a little bit more alive, but you can only do that when the paint is still wet. And I know that the flats is written in white, and I don't care. I'm going to just write over that later with a dark pencil or something. And then this awning is really, it's not really different, but I can make it a little bit different by making it red. Okay. And there we go. Okay. So while that's drying, I'm going to come back over here to the windows. And the thing about windows is that it's glass and it's reflecting the sky, and sometimes you won't see the sky reflecting. You'll see through the window, and usually it's going to be dark. So where I'm standing, I can see kind of the sky reflected off the window. So if I look at it, it looks gray. But what I like to do to make the windows look like they're reflecting is I like to take the color that I used for the sky, and I like to use it in part of the window, but not all of it. So I'll put it there, and I'll put it kind of here on this part of the window too, and I'll put it on some of that window. And it's okay that it's really saturated, and I'll put it on some of this area too. Okay. While it's wet, I'm going to come in here and add a little bit of a darker color. I'm going to mix up like a purple. This is, what colors? What is that? Make it darker so that it has a little bit of a variance to it. Okay. And then I'll add some of that down here too. Now you see that this area that I'm adding it down here is wet, part of it, and part of it is dry, and that's okay. Okay. All right, and then I'll do kind of the same thing for the other one. And anything that's dark, I can paint later. Now, I haven't even touched that clock yet, so I'm going to just mix up a gray that from all the colors that are on my palette. Basically, when you mix all the colors on your palette, you're going to get some kind of a brown or a gray. And I want the clock face to be white, so I'm going to leave that color page. And there we go there. All right. I'm waiting for these areas to dry. This one is not done yet, so I can come back and do that. I forgot that that's a window glass as well. But that has lighter panels, so I'm going to negatively paint the dark panels in as little kind of rectangles. And I think it's always fun to also make those varied as well. And you can see this is not perfect. And then I'll do the windows there. And that, because it's kind of the same color as the other windows, it has that same feeling. And these are also windows, but they're much darker. Okay, so now that's drying. Now what I can do is I'm going to start painting. I'm almost done with this. I'm going to create the darkest areas, not by using black, but I'm going to use some dark value colors like my blues. And I'm going to mix my blues with my reds. And that usually gets me a purple, right? But if it's too saturated, what I can do to make it desaturated is add the opposite color, which is yellow. So if I take this purple and I add it to the orange over here, it's going to turn into like a grayish color. And that almost looks like it could be black. So I really like that, and I like how dark it is. So I'm going to use that as like the window pane framing, and then like the wrought iron area over there. So at this point, I could almost use a smaller brush, but I'm going to just be consistent and use the same brush for everything. That's still wet, and I just discovered that because my paint blurred everywhere. You can see that it's dry here and it's a hard line. It's not a hard line there. Okay. And here I can make this wrought iron. It's really simply there. I could put like a little, what time is it? It's like whatever time that says. And then do that area here. But this area is really dark over here. So now I'm going to actually make this a little bit lighter and make this window have the dark part in it. I didn't even do that awning. And I could do this whole area just can be dark as well. And here's something else that I can do. This is something that I haven't showed you guys yet. This is called edge pulling. So edge pulling is when you put down paint on a dry surface like this, and then you soften it by cleaning your brush, getting water, and then just going right along the edge of it, and then putting down clean water, and that allows the paint that's there to kind of flow into the area that you're putting the water on. And that's called edge pulling. I'm gonna make that door kind of like a green color to kind of go with the other green that I have, even though that requires a little bit more information in there. And I'm just gonna make that a little bit different. And then I know that this bottom part down here, this probably needs some dark area as well. And I'll put a little bit more dark areas on this window so that feels like a dark window. Well, and I have all this pencil line here that I didn't outline, but I can kind of do that with. And what I usually do in the end, because I'm getting towards the end of it, is I start just unifying things with like a dark color like this purple. So I realized that there's an area that I didn't paint. So I'm gonna make this blue. It's not blue, it's black, but and let's see, what else can I do here? I can add some darker areas here, and make this look like a doorway, and I can add some dark areas here. So I haven't even gotten to the honey yet, and the honey would be just the darkest areas of color, and that is going to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to intentionally do that with this blue and this red, and I'm going to make it thicker, like maybe this is still kind of milky, not too sticky. And what this is going to do is it's going to kind of create shadows underneath things. And so I might put a shadow under here, under this awning, so that it looks like there's a shadow under this awning here. I might put a little bit of a shadow under that architectural element here. I could put a little bit of a line in between that building, and that's going to feel like it's separate now. I could put some of that like shadows on the left side and the bottom of all of these elements here. And this is kind of like when you're putting a drop shadow on something to make it feel like it's got some depth. And basically putting this dark line underneath all of the big shapes that I have, just to make it feel like there's a shadow. And outline the door. Put it along the bottom. I can add like in there. And then one thing that I didn't do is I want to add some bright colors. And that's usually the thing that I do at the very end. And so I'll add like a bright red to these lamps. And I don't see any other bright areas that I could add anything to, but I like that bright bit of color there. I might add just a bit of color in some areas, like maybe I'll make this awning a little bit more red. And I could even make this Felix Continental part, the wood, a little bit more saturated in some of it, but not all of it, so that it has some variation to it. And then maybe just one last thing. I drew this and I didn't do anything with it, so I'm going to make that into a little. And there we go. Okay, questions? No? All right, stop.